My name is Sophia Mitchell, and I'm 24 years old. At my Stanford graduation dinner, my dad Harold slid a one-way bus ticket across the expensive restaurant table while my stepmom Beverly smirked beside him. My half-siblings Madison and Tyler watched with barely concealed glee as he declared, "You're on your own now. This family has supported you long enough." The ticket destination read some small town I'd never heard of. As Beverly added with fake sweetness, "Maybe struggling will teach you some humility," I kept my face perfectly calm. Little did they know, I could buy this entire restaurant chain without checking my bank balance. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and hidden wealth, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride of justice and revenge. Make sure to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now let's get into the shocking truth about my so-called loving family. The roots of this nightmare began 12 years earlier when my mother Catherine died in what everyone called a tragic accident. I was only 12, devastated and completely alone in the world. What I didn't know then was that my father Harold was already having an affair with Beverly, his secretary at the accounting firm. Within 8 months of Mom's funeral, he announced their engagement like it was some kind of celebration. I remember standing in our kitchen, still wearing black clothes from grief, watching this strange woman rearrange my mother's dishes and throw away her photos. Beverly was calculated in every move she made. She never yelled or showed obvious cruelty in front of my father. Instead, she worked like poison in the bloodstream, slowly turning him against me with carefully planted seeds of doubt and manipulation. When I scored high on tests, she'd whisper to Dad that I was probably cheating. When teachers called with praise, she'd suggest I was manipulating them for attention. She had this way of making her observations sound like loving concern, always delivered with that sickeningly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. The real devastation came when I discovered what happened to my mother's inheritance. Mom had been smart with money, investing in properties and saving accounts that should have secured my future. Dad claimed the investments had gone bad, the properties lost value, and the accounts were needed for family expenses. I believed him because I was just a kid who trusted her father. Years later, I realized Beverly had orchestrated the systematic draining of every penny that belonged to me. She convinced Dad to liquidate Mom's assets to fund their new life together, including the house renovations that erased every trace of my mother's existence. By the time Beverly's own children arrived, Madison when I was 14 and Tyler when I was 16, the transformation of our family was complete. These weren't just new siblings, they were living proof of my replacement. Madison got the bedroom that used to be my mom's craft room, decorated with thousands of dollars worth of furniture and clothes. Tyler received the basement that Dad converted into an entertainment paradise with gaming systems and expensive electronics. Meanwhile, I was moved to the tiny room above the garage, told it was time I learned independence. The golden child treatment was suffocating to witness. Madison's mediocre grades were celebrated like academic achievements, while my honor roll status was dismissed as expected minimum performance. Tyler's involvement in sports meant expensive equipment, travel teams, and family attendance at every game, while my computer programming competitions were considered weird hobbies not worth supporting. Beverly made sure Dad's credit card statements reflected these priorities, with hundreds spent monthly on her children's activities while my requests for basic school supplies were met with lectures about budgeting. The real breaking point came when Beverly orchestrated her first major scheme against me. Madison's expensive jewelry went missing right before a school dance, and somehow the evidence pointed directly to me. Beverly had planted one of Madison's rings in my backpack, discovered during a family dinner when she suggested we all check our rooms together. The look of hurt disappointment on my father's face when he found that ring still haunts me today. He didn't even ask for my side of the story, just accepted Beverly's tearful explanation about how difficult it must be for me to see Madison having nice things. Under pressure and terrified of losing what little family connection I had left, I confessed to stealing the jewelry just to end the nightmare. That confession became Beverly's weapon for years afterward, proof that I was untrustworthy and jealous of my siblings. My punishment was severe. banned from family vacations, forbidden from joining friends' activities, and reduced to essentially a live-in servant. I cooked dinners, cleaned bathrooms, and did laundry while Madison and Tyler enjoyed their privileged teenage years. Dad justified this treatment as character building, never realizing how completely Beverly had manipulated him into abandoning his first daughter. Working multiple jobs through high school wasn't just about spending money, it was survival. I waited tables at a local diner, tutored younger students in math and science, and spent weekends cleaning offices downtown. Every dollar I earned was scrutinized by Beverly, who convinced Dad that monitoring my income taught responsibility. She'd examine my pay stubs and demand explanations for how the money was spent, always looking for evidence of irresponsible choices she could report to my father. Those long hours away from home were actually a blessing, giving me escape from the toxic atmosphere and time to plan my future without their interference. The emotional withdrawal of my father was perhaps the cruelest part of Beverly's campaign. This man who used to read me bedtime stories and help with homework became a stranger who saw me as a burden and disappointment. Beverly's constant criticism had convinced him that I was ungrateful, manipulative, and potentially dangerous to the family's happiness. Every conversation between us became strained, filtered through Beverly's interpretations and suspicions. I could see him struggling sometimes, moments when his paternal instincts fought against Beverly's programming, but she always won. By my senior year of high school, we barely spoke except when necessary, and even then, his words carried the cold distance of someone who'd given up on me completely. Getting into Stanford with a full scholarship should have been a moment of family celebration, but instead, it became another battlefield. When the acceptance letter arrived, Beverly's face went through a series of emotions that would have been comical if they weren't so devastating. First shock, then anger, then that calculating look that meant she was already planning how to undermine this achievement. Within hours, she'd convinced Dad that full scholarships were probably mistakes, that I'd somehow manipulated the system, or that the standards must be lower than we thought. She planted the idea that leaving for college was me abandoning the family who'd sacrificed so much for me. The refusal to contribute anything toward college expenses was Beverly's masterstroke of cruelty. Dad's accounting firm was doing well, and they'd just purchased a second vacation home in Colorado, yet somehow there was no money available for textbooks, dorm supplies, or even basic toiletries. Beverly explained to concerned relatives that they believed in teaching independence, that helping too much would spoil me and prevent character development. Meanwhile, Madison's plans for community college came with promises of a new car, spending money, and a fully funded social life. The contrast was stark and intentional, designed to remind me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. My Stanford roommate Emma Chen became my first real ally in years, someone who listened without judgment and offered friendship without ulterior motives. She came from a loving immigrant family who celebrated academic achievement, and her shock at my family's situation helped me realize just how abnormal my experience had been. Emma's parents treated me like a second daughter during visits, insisting I join family dinners and including me in holiday celebrations when going home wasn't financially feasible. Through Emma's family, I remembered what genuine care and support felt like, which made returning to my dad's house during breaks even more painful by comparison. It was in our tiny dorm room that I first developed the revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithm that would eventually make me billions. Late nights coding while Emma studied for pre-med courses, I stumbled onto a breakthrough in machine learning that could predict consumer behavior with unprecedented accuracy. What started as a computer science assignment evolved into something far more significant when I realized the commercial applications. Emma encouraged me to pursue the project seriously, even helping me research patent processes and business development resources available through the university. Beverly's attempts to sabotage my internship opportunities revealed just how far her surveillance and control extended. Somehow, she always knew about my applications and interview schedules, information that could only have come through monitoring my communications or conversations. Professional references would receive anonymous calls questioning my character, citing the jewelry theft incident from high school and expressing concerns about my trustworthiness. Potential employers would mention these calls during interviews, forcing me to address accusations I thought were buried in the past. The pattern became clear: Beverly was actively working to ensure my failure, even hundreds of miles away from home. Madison's role as spy and saboteur became increasingly obvious as my college years progressed. She'd call regularly under the pretense of sisterly bonding, asking detailed questions about my classes, social life, and future plans. Information I shared in confidence would somehow make its way back to Beverly within days, usually twisted to support whatever narrative she was building about my character or intentions. Madison's social media posts about family life were carefully curated to exclude me entirely, creating a public image of a happy family of 4 that had never included a difficult older daughter. The fake family emergencies were Beverly's cruelest manipulation tactic, designed to make me miss crucial academic and professional opportunities. During my sophomore year, I received panicked calls about Dad having chest pains and needing family support, causing me to miss a major presentation that counted heavily toward my final grade. When I arrived home, Dad was perfectly healthy, working in his garden, completely confused about why I'd rushed back. Beverly's explanation that she'd been worried about his stress levels and wanted family support sounded reasonable to him, but I recognized it as calculated sabotage. These emergencies always seemed to coincide with my most important deadlines or opportunities. Dr. James Rodriguez, my advanced algorithms professor, became an unexpected mentor when he recognized the commercial potential of my AI project. A former tech industry executive who'd returned to academia, he understood both the technical brilliance and business implications of what I'd developed. Our partnership began as faculty guidance but evolved into something more significant when he offered to help me navigate the patent process and business development. Dr. Rodriguez became the second member of what would eventually be my chosen family, offering wisdom and support that my biological family had never provided. The discovery of my early business ventures sent Beverly into full attack mode, though she didn't understand the true scope of what I was building. When she found evidence of small consulting contracts and freelance programming work, she interpreted it as proof that I was greedy and money-focused rather than committed to family relationships. Her campaign against my so-called business ambitions included spreading rumors among extended family members about my selfish priorities and manipulative behavior. She painted a picture of an ungrateful daughter who was using education as an excuse to abandon family values and pursue materialistic goals. The coordinated attack involving Beverly, Madison, and Tyler represented a new level of family warfare that caught me completely off guard. They spread rumors about me stealing family money to fund my startup, providing just enough details to make the accusations sound credible while being impossible to definitively disprove. Tyler's social media posts included vague references to family members who took advantage of others' generosity, while Madison shared passive-aggressive memes about trust and betrayal. Beverly's conversations with Dad painted a picture of a daughter who was probably involved in something illegal or unethical, given the mysterious nature of my business activities. Dad's ultimatum came during a tense family dinner during my junior year spring break. Beverly had spent weeks building toward this confrontation, presenting evidence of my suspicious business activities and lack of family commitment. He demanded I choose between what he called family loyalty and my greedy business ambitions, completely unaware that my company was already generating significant revenue and attracting major investor interest. The choice he offered wasn't really a choice at all, since Beverly's definition of family loyalty meant complete submission to her authority and abandonment of my own goals and dreams. My decision to go completely underground with my business identity was born from that impossible ultimatum and the realization that my family would never support my success. I created elaborate barriers between my personal and professional life, using Dr. Rodriguez's connections and legal advice to establish business entities that couldn't be traced back to Sophia Mitchell. The company became SM Tech Solutions, with carefully constructed corporate structures that protected my identity while allowing the business to grow exponentially. This decision to hide my success would later become the foundation for the most satisfying revenge imaginable. Graduation day at Stanford should have been one of the proudest moments of my life, but my family's behavior turned it into a public humiliation that revealed their true nature to everyone watching. They arrived 30 minutes late to the ceremony, dressed like they were attending a casual barbecue rather than a university graduation. Dad wore wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt with visible stains, while Beverly sported a loud floral dress more appropriate for a weekend shopping trip. Madison and Tyler looked equally unprepared, both obviously resentful about being forced to attend what they considered a waste of their time. Beverly's passive-aggressive comments throughout the ceremony were delivered just loud enough for surrounding families to hear, each one designed to diminish my achievements and embarrass me publicly. When my name was called for graduating summa cum laude, she muttered something about great inflation making honors meaningless these days. During the computer science department recognition ceremony, she complained loudly about the length of the program and wondered why they couldn't just mail the diploma instead of forcing families to sit through boring speeches. Other parents looked at our group with confusion and growing disapproval, clearly wondering what kind of people behaved this way at their daughter's graduation. Madison's social media documentation of the day focused entirely on her outfit choices and complaints about the uncomfortable seating, with strategic photos that excluded me from family group shots. Her Instagram stories included eye-rolling videos during my department's recognition ceremony, captioned with comments about pretentious academic environments and people who thought they were better than everyone else. These posts were seen by hundreds of her followers, including extended family members and family friends who'd supported me over the years. The public nature of her mockery was clearly intentional, designed to humiliate me among people whose opinions mattered. The restaurant confrontation that evening escalated far beyond just the presentation of that bus ticket, though that moment will forever be seared into my memory. We'd gone to an upscale steakhouse that Dad chose specifically to demonstrate his success to other diners, but his treatment of me contradicted any image of family prosperity or happiness. The one-way ticket to some obscure small town was presented like a graduation gift, wrapped in tissue paper and accompanied by Beverly's explanation that sometimes people needed a fresh start away from environments that had made them too comfortable. Dad's public declaration that they'd wasted enough money on me was delivered loud enough to silence conversations at nearby tables. He detailed the financial sacrifices the family had made, completely rewriting history to paint himself as a generous father who'd been taken advantage of by an ungrateful daughter. According to his version of events, I'd been given every opportunity and advantage, yet had never shown proper appreciation or consideration for my family's needs. The other restaurant patrons were clearly uncomfortable witnessing this family drama, but Dad seemed energized by having an audience for his grievances. Beverly's prepared speech about entitled children was obviously something she'd rehearsed, delivered with the tone of someone providing valuable life lessons rather than inflicting deliberate cruelty. She explained to the increasingly uncomfortable restaurant that young people today expected everything handed to them without learning the value of hard work and independence. Her lecture about character building and the importance of struggle was peppered with specific criticisms of my attitude and behavior, painting me as spoiled and unrealistic in my expectations. The irony of this speech coming from someone who'd manipulated her way into wealth through marriage was apparently lost on her. Tyler's decision to record parts of this humiliation for his social media followers demonstrated the complete lack of empathy or basic decency that Beverly had instilled in her children. His phone captured my father's cruel declarations and Beverly's patronizing lecture, with commentary about how awkward family dinners could be when some people took themselves too seriously. These videos were posted to multiple platforms with hashtags about family drama and entitled siblings, ensuring maximum exposure for my public humiliation. The casual cruelty of documenting and sharing such a painful moment showed exactly who these people really were. The other diners' reactions ranged from shocked silence to obvious disapproval, with several families requesting to be moved to different sections of the restaurant. One elderly woman approached our table during Beverly's speech to ask if everything was all right, clearly concerned about what appeared to be emotional abuse happening in public. Her kindness in that moment of cruelty almost broke my composure, but I managed to assure her that everything was fine while internally screaming at the injustice of the situation. What my family didn't know, couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams, was that SM Tech Solutions had just received a preliminary acquisition offer from a major technology corporation for $4.2 billion. The irony of their financial manipulation and control tactics was staggering, given that I was potentially worth more money than they could comprehend. My revolutionary AI algorithm had caught the attention of industry leaders who understood its commercial applications in ways that my family never could. The timing of their cruelty, delivered on the very day I'd reached the pinnacle of both academic and financial success, made their behavior even more devastating. The decision of whether to reveal my true situation became the defining moment of that horrible evening. Part of me wanted to stand up in that restaurant and announce exactly who they were trying to humiliate, to watch their faces as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. But a deeper wisdom, perhaps inherited from my mother's thoughtful nature, suggested that keeping my secrets would ultimately provide better opportunities for justice. Let them continue believing they held power over me while I planned a response that would correct years of abuse and manipulation. Beverly's final insult, delivered as they prepared to leave me stranded with that bus ticket, was perhaps the most revealing moment of her true character. Her suggestion that struggling would teach me humility was delivered with genuine satisfaction, proof that causing my pain was not just a byproduct of her manipulation but an actual goal. She wanted me to suffer, to fail, to prove that her assessment of my worthlessness had been correct all along. That moment of pure malice, witnessed by strangers and recorded by Tyler, would eventually become evidence of exactly who these people really were. Dr. James Rodriguez had always known about my business identity, serving as both mentor and silent partner in SM Tech Solutions from its earliest days. His experience as a former Silicon Valley executive provided crucial guidance in navigating the complex world of venture capital, intellectual property protection, and corporate development that my revolutionary AI algorithm had thrust me into. Unlike my biological family, Dr. Rodriguez understood that my technical brilliance combined with business acumen represented something extraordinary, worthy of nurturing rather than undermining. His office became my safe space for processing the graduation humiliation while planning a strategic response that would address years of accumulated injustice. The introduction of Rachel Thompson, private investigator, came through Dr. Rodriguez's network of professional contacts who specialized in corporate security and family law matters. Rachel's expertise in financial fraud investigation and background research made her perfectly suited to uncover the truth about Beverly's history and current activities. Our first meeting revealed that my suspicions about Beverly's manipulative nature had barely scratched the surface of her actual criminal behavior. Rachel's preliminary research suggested patterns of financial exploitation and identity manipulation that went far beyond simple gold digging or family manipulation. Rachel's investigation into Beverly's background yielded shocking discoveries that reframed everything I'd experienced over the past 12 years. Beverly had previously targeted 3 other wealthy widowed men, each relationship following a similar pattern of rapid courtship, marriage, financial consolidation, and mysterious endings when the men either died or divorced her under suspicious circumstances. Her real name wasn't even Beverly, she'd been born Brenda Walsh and had systematically reinvented her identity multiple times to escape legal consequences and start fresh with new victims. The insurance claims and property transfers associated with her previous relationships suggested a level of premeditation and criminal sophistication that made my family situation far more sinister than simple stepmother rivalry. The evidence of Beverly manipulating Dad's will and estate planning was particularly devastating, revealing how thoroughly she'd positioned herself to benefit from his eventual death while ensuring I received nothing. Legal documents showed systematic changes to beneficiary designations, property ownership transfers, and life insurance policies that effectively erased me from Dad's financial legacy. Beverly had convinced him to establish trusts and investment accounts that gave her complete control over family assets, while presenting these changes as smart financial planning rather than inheritance theft. The timeline of these modifications coincided perfectly with moments when I'd achieved academic or personal success, suggesting calculated responses to minimize any future claims I might make. Madison's hidden debt and dangerous spending habits revealed another layer of family dysfunction that Beverly had carefully concealed from Dad's awareness. Credit card statements showed tens of thousands of dollars in charges for luxury goods, travel, and entertainment that far exceeded any reasonable allowance or part-time job income. Madison's attempts to maintain her privileged lifestyle had led to involvement with predatory lending services and potential fraud schemes that could result in serious legal consequences. Beverly's enabling of this behavior while simultaneously criticizing my financial responsibility demonstrated a level of hypocrisy that was breathtaking in its audacity. Tyler's involvement in cyberbullying incidents at school represented more than typical teenage cruelty. His behavior showed patterns of psychological manipulation and targeted harassment that mirrored Beverly's own tactics. School records revealed multiple disciplinary actions for online harassment of classmates, with particular focus on students from lower-income families or those who achieved academic recognition. His social media history documented systematic campaigns of humiliation directed at vulnerable peers, behavior that had resulted in at least 2 families filing harassment complaints with local authorities. The apple had definitely not fallen far from the tree in terms of deriving pleasure from others' suffering. Dad's business facing serious financial difficulties came as a surprise, given Beverly's continued spending and lifestyle maintenance. Rachel's investigation revealed that the accounting firm had lost several major clients due to errors and missed deadlines, problems that coincided with Dad's increased distraction and emotional unavailability at home. Beverly's constant drama and manipulation had apparently affected his professional competence, creating a downward spiral that threatened the financial foundation of their entire lifestyle. The irony that Beverly's behavior was destroying the very wealth she'd married to access would have been amusing if it weren't so dangerous for everyone involved. Beverly's secret gambling addiction provided the missing piece of the puzzle regarding the family's hidden financial stress. Casino records and online betting accounts revealed hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses over the past several years, funded through systematic liquidation of family assets and increasing debt obligations. This addiction explained the aggressive timeline of Beverly's manipulation of Dad's will and accounts. She needed immediate access to larger amounts of money to cover gambling debts and continue her lifestyle. The loan sharks and predatory lenders involved in financing her addiction represented serious physical danger for the entire family, though Dad remained completely unaware of the threat. My strategic planning phase involved careful consideration of timing, methods, and desired outcomes for exposing Beverly's criminal behavior while protecting myself from potential retaliation. Dr. Rodriguez's advice to strike when they were most vulnerable required patience and careful observation of family dynamics and external pressures. The goal was not just revenge for years of abuse, but actual justice that would protect future victims and ensure appropriate consequences for past crimes. This meant building an airtight case that would satisfy law enforcement requirements while also providing evidence for civil litigation. The anonymous financial monitoring of family accounts, conducted through Rachel's investigative resources and legal channels, provided real-time information about Beverly's continued criminal activity and the family's accelerating financial crisis. These monitoring systems revealed the true scope of Beverly's theft from Dad's accounts, her continued gambling losses, and her increasingly desperate attempts to access additional sources of funding. The data also showed Madison's escalating fraud activity and Tyler's involvement in schemes that could result in criminal charges, painting a picture of a family completely out of control. Rachel's investigation into the circumstances surrounding my mother's death represented the most serious and emotionally difficult aspect of building our case against Beverly. Medical records, insurance claims, and timeline analysis revealed suspicious patterns that warranted renewed investigation by authorities. Beverly's rapid insertion into our family, combined with her documented history of exploiting widowed men, suggested the possibility that my mother's death had not been as accidental as originally determined. This revelation was both devastating and vindicating, potentially explaining the source of my lifelong instinct that something was fundamentally wrong about Beverly's presence in our lives. The discovery that Beverly might have hastened my mother's death investigation was the final piece of evidence needed to justify the comprehensive justice campaign I was planning. If Beverly had murdered my mother to access Dad's wealth and eliminate the primary obstacle to her manipulation, then every subsequent abuse I'd endured was connected to that original crime. This realization transformed my desire for personal revenge into a moral obligation to seek justice for my mother's memory and prevent Beverly from harming anyone else. The strategic response would need to address not just family dynamics, but potentially serious criminal behavior that demanded law enforcement involvement. The collapse of Dad's business began with the discovery that his longtime partner Edward Morrison had been embezzling funds for years, systematically draining the company accounts while Beverly's manipulation kept Dad distracted from daily operations. Edward's sophisticated scheme involved creating fake vendor accounts, inflating contract values, and redirecting client payments to personal accounts, theft that totaled nearly $600,000 over 3 years. The timing of this revelation couldn't have been worse for Dad, coming just as Beverly's gambling debts reached critical mass and the family faced mounting legal expenses from Tyler's cyberbullying incidents. Beverly's gambling addiction had attracted the attention of increasingly dangerous creditors who operated outside traditional banking systems and had little patience for payment delays. These loan sharks began making threatening phone calls to the family home and showing up unannounced at Dad's office, demanding immediate payment of debts that had ballooned through compound interest and penalty fees. Beverly's attempts to hide this crisis from Dad became impossible when these men made it clear that violence was a real possibility if payments weren't received promptly. The contrast between Beverly's public image as a respectable suburban housewife and her involvement with dangerous criminals was jarring for everyone who thought they knew our family. Madison's credit card fraud scheme involved sophisticated identity theft and document forgery that federal authorities had been investigating for several months before making arrests. She'd been working with a network of other young adults to create fake identities for credit applications, then systematically maxing out credit lines before abandoning the accounts. Her role in this conspiracy was more significant than simple participation. Records showed she'd recruited other students and provided training in fraud techniques learned from online resources. The federal charges carried potential prison sentences that would destroy any hopes of continuing her privileged lifestyle or maintaining her social media influencer aspirations. Tyler's cyberbullying escalated into criminal territory when his harassment campaigns resulted in 2 attempted suicides by his victims, transforming what school administrators had dismissed as teenage drama into serious legal liability for our family. The lawsuits filed by the victims' families sought both criminal prosecution and substantial financial damages, claiming that Tyler's systematic psychological torture had caused lasting emotional trauma requiring extensive therapy and medical intervention. Evidence presented to authorities included hundreds of messages, manipulated photos, and coordinated harassment campaigns that demonstrated premeditation and sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation techniques. The desperate family attempts to contact me for reconciliation began within days of these cascading crises becoming undeniable realities that threatened their survival. Beverly's phone calls were masterpieces of manipulation, delivered with tearful apologies and claims that she'd finally realized how wrong she'd been about my character and value to the family. Her scripts were obviously prepared, touching on specific incidents from our shared history while carefully avoiding any admission of actual wrongdoing or criminal behavior. The sudden urgency of her desire for family unity coincided perfectly with the timing of their financial and legal emergencies, making her motivations transparent to anyone paying attention. Madison's social media transformation from cruel mockery to desperate sisterly love was equally obvious and pathetic in its transparency. Her Instagram posts began featuring throwback photos of us together as children, accompanied by captions about missing family members and regretting past misunderstandings. These posts were clearly designed to create public evidence of our close relationship that could be referenced during court proceedings or family meetings. Her attempt to rewrite our history through social media manipulation showed that she'd learned Beverly's techniques well, though her execution lacked the sophistication that might have made it believable. Dad's awkward attempts to rebuild our relationship were perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this period, because unlike Beverly's calculated manipulation, his efforts seemed genuinely motivated by paternal instincts finally awakening to the reality of our situation. His phone calls were stilted and uncomfortable, filled with long silences and obvious uncertainty about how to reconnect with a daughter he'd systematically pushed away for years. The pain in his voice when discussing family problems suggested genuine regret about how our relationship had deteriorated, though he still seemed unable to recognize Beverly's role in orchestrating that estrangement. My carefully crafted illusion of struggling financially was designed to encourage their belief that I needed their help as much as they needed mine, setting the stage for the ultimate revelation of my actual circumstances. I moved into a modest apartment near campus, took a position as a teaching assistant that provided minimal income, and made strategic appearances at budget restaurants and discount stores where family members or their friends might observe my apparent financial limitations. Social media posts carefully documented a lifestyle of thrift store clothing, ramen noodle dinners, and part-time job schedules that painted a picture of someone barely making ends meet. The family's relief that I'd apparently learned my lesson was evident in their increasingly bold requests for assistance and reconciliation. Beverly's calls became more frequent and demanding, suggesting that my struggles had proven her right about the value of humility and hard work. Madison's messages included passive-aggressive hints about successful siblings supporting family members during difficult times, while Tyler's rare communications focused on family loyalty and the importance of forgiveness. Their assumption that financial desperation would make me grateful for any opportunity to rejoin the family demonstrated how completely they'd misunderstood my character and motivations. Rachel's revelation of Beverly's most damaging secret came through connection with investigators from Beverly's previous marriages who'd been building a comprehensive case across multiple jurisdictions. The evidence of insurance fraud related to my mother's death involved forged medical records, witness tampering, and coordination with corrupt officials who'd been paid to minimize investigation into suspicious circumstances. Beverly's pattern of targeting wealthy widowed men included sophisticated research into their assets, family relationships, and potential vulnerabilities that suggested criminal organization rather than simple opportunistic behavior. The evidence of insurance fraud related to my mother's death was both devastating and vindicating, confirming suspicions I'd carried for years about the circumstances surrounding her sudden decline and death. Medical records showed prescriptions for medications that my mother had never taken, administered by a doctor who'd since lost his license for participating in insurance fraud schemes. Witness statements had been altered to support Beverly's timeline of events, while physical evidence from the scene had been mishandled or destroyed before proper analysis could be completed. The emerging picture suggested that my mother's death had been carefully orchestrated murder disguised as natural causes. My emotional breakdown upon learning the truth about my mother's murder was followed by a determination for justice that went far beyond personal revenge and entered the realm of moral obligation. Dr. Rodriguez provided crucial support during this crisis, helping me channel devastating grief and rage into focused planning that would ensure appropriate consequences for Beverly's crimes while protecting other potential victims. The realization that I'd spent years being manipulated by my mother's murderer added layers of trauma that required careful processing to avoid making emotional decisions that could compromise the legal case we were building. The final preparation phase for ultimate revelation required coordination between law enforcement agencies, legal counsel, and financial experts who could present evidence in ways that would maximize both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. Rachel's investigation had generated sufficient evidence to support charges of fraud, elder abuse, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and potentially murder, while my business success provided resources to fund comprehensive legal action that would ensure justice rather than plea bargains or reduced charges. The strategy was designed to systematically dismantle Beverly's life the same way she'd destroyed mine, but through legal means that would provide permanent consequences rather than temporary satisfaction. The anonymous tips that triggered official investigation of Beverly's fraud came from carefully coordinated sources that Rachel had cultivated within law enforcement and regulatory agencies across multiple states. These tips provided investigators with specific account numbers, document references, and timeline details that would have been impossible for them to discover through routine investigation methods. The beauty of this approach was that authorities believed they'd uncovered Beverly's crimes through their own detective work, making the resulting prosecutions more robust and less vulnerable to claims of entrapment or targeted harassment. Madison's arrest for credit card fraud occurred during a carefully orchestrated sting operation that caught her in the act of training new recruits in identity theft techniques. Federal agents had been monitoring her online communications and financial transactions for months, building an airtight case that included recorded conversations, digital evidence, and testimony from co-conspirators who'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Her shock at being arrested during what she thought was a routine coffee meeting with potential fraud recruits was captured on surveillance video that would later be used as evidence of her leadership role in the criminal organization. The family crisis triggered by Madison's federal charges created exactly the desperate circumstances needed for my planned return to their lives, though I waited several days before responding to Dad's increasingly panicked phone calls begging for help. When I finally agreed to meet with them, it was under carefully controlled circumstances that allowed me to present myself as cautiously successful rather than obviously wealthy, accompanied by Dr. Rodriguez, who was introduced as my boyfriend rather than business partner. This deception was designed to test their reactions to my apparent good fortune while concealing the true extent of my success until the proper moment for maximum impact. The family's desperate attempts to impress Dr. Rodriguez revealed their priorities and values with painful clarity, as they focused entirely on his perceived wealth and status rather than showing any genuine interest in my happiness or well-being. Beverly's behavior around my supposed successful boyfriend was textbook manipulation, alternating between flattery and subtle attempts to establish dominance while positioning herself as the family authority on relationships and social status. Dad's awkward attempts to discuss business opportunities and investment strategies demonstrated his complete ignorance about the nature of modern technology industries while revealing his own financial desperation. Madison's jail calls begging for bail money and legal assistance were monitored and recorded as part of federal investigation procedures, providing additional evidence of family dynamics and criminal coordination while demonstrating the extent to which Beverly had taught her children to exploit emotional manipulation for financial gain. These conversations revealed Madison's complete lack of remorse for her criminal behavior, focusing entirely on the inconvenience of legal consequences rather than acknowledging harm caused to victims. Her demands for family support were delivered with entitlement that suggested she viewed criminal prosecution as unfair treatment rather than appropriate consequences for illegal actions. Dad's breakdown during our family meeting was genuinely heartbreaking to witness, representing the moment when years of denial and manipulation finally collapsed under the weight of undeniable reality. His admission that the business was failing and he needed financial assistance was delivered with humiliation and desperation that revealed how completely he'd lost control of his life circumstances. Beverly's influence had isolated him from other family relationships and professional networks that might have provided support during this crisis, leaving him completely dependent on a woman whose criminal behavior was destroying everything he'd worked to build. Beverly's mask slipping as she demanded I help the family represented the first time I'd seen her authentic personality without the careful manipulation and emotional regulation she usually maintained. Her insistence that helping family was my duty regardless of how I'd been treated revealed the entitled thinking that drove her criminal behavior and exploitation of others. The contrast between her previous dismissive cruelty and current desperate demands for assistance was stark enough that even Dad seemed to notice something disturbing about her rapid personality shifts. Dr. Rodriguez's generous offer to invest in Dad's business was carefully calibrated to appear legitimate while creating opportunities to gather additional evidence about Beverly's financial manipulation and criminal planning. His professional credentials and apparent wealth made the investment offer credible, while the due diligence process would require disclosure of financial records and business practices that would reveal the full extent of Beverly's theft and fraud. This approach allowed us to gather evidence while appearing to provide the assistance the family desperately needed. The family's premature celebration of their apparent financial salvation was both pathetic and illuminating, demonstrating how quickly they could shift from crisis mode to entitled expectation when rescue appeared possible. Beverly's immediate attempts to position herself as the primary contact for business discussions revealed her compulsive need to control financial transactions and maintain authority over family decisions. Her suggestions about expanding the investment to include additional family projects and opportunities showed that she viewed Dr. Rodriguez as another potential victim for her exploitation schemes. Beverly's attempt to manipulate the business investment for personal gain represented the final piece of evidence needed to demonstrate her ongoing criminal intent and lack of genuine remorse for past behavior. Her private conversations with Dr. Rodriguez included suggestions about redirecting investment funds to pay off family debts, fund legal defense costs, and provide personal spending money for family members, all presented as legitimate business expenses rather than personal enrichment. These attempts to defraud someone she believed was my boyfriend provided additional charges that prosecutors could use to ensure substantial prison sentences. My careful documentation of all manipulation attempts during this period created a comprehensive record of Beverly's criminal psychology and methods that would be valuable for both prosecution and victim impact statements during eventual court proceedings. The recordings and written records of her emotional manipulation, false promises, and attempts to exploit perceived vulnerabilities demonstrated patterns of behavior that supported charges of conspiracy, elder abuse, and ongoing fraud. This documentation also protected me from potential claims that I had entrapped or manipulated family members into incriminating themselves. The growing realization among family members that their problems were accelerating rather than resolving despite my apparent willingness to help created additional stress and desperation that would soon force them to show their true colors completely. Beverly's increasing frustration with her inability to control the investment process began manifesting as more obvious threats and manipulation attempts directed at me personally. The careful balance she'd maintained between appearing victimized and maintaining authority was breaking down under pressure, setting the stage for the complete exposure I was planning. The dramatic family meeting I called for the following Saturday was carefully staged in the conference room of Dr. Rodriguez's law office, a setting that immediately suggested serious business while providing security and legal protection for what I was about to reveal. When I arrived in a luxury sedan with a security detail and wearing designer clothing that probably cost more than Dad's monthly salary, the family's confusion was palpable. Beverly's immediate attempt to question my appearance and apparent wealth was deflected with vague references to recent business successes, building suspense while documenting their reactions to my obvious prosperity. The methodical revelation of my business empire began with Dr. Rodriguez presenting corporate documents, financial statements, and media coverage that established SM Tech Solutions as one of the most successful artificial intelligence companies in the world. Forbes articles ranking me among the youngest billionaires, Wall Street Journal profiles of my revolutionary algorithm, and TechCrunch coverage of our latest acquisition deals painted a picture of success that was impossible to dismiss or minimize. The documentation was overwhelming and undeniable, representing years of achievement that had occurred entirely outside their knowledge or influence. Dad's shock was so profound that he actually stopped breathing for several seconds, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of how badly he'd misjudged and mistreated his own daughter. His whispered "This isn't possible" represented more than just surprise about my success. It was the sound of a man's worldview completely collapsing as he confronted the reality of his choices and their consequences. The recognition that he'd given a bus ticket to someone who could buy his entire company without noticing the expense was devastating to witness, even given everything he'd put me through. Beverly's calculation was visible as she processed this new information, her manipulative instincts immediately working to find ways to exploit the situation for her benefit. Within minutes, she was attempting to claim credit for my success, suggesting that the family's tough love approach had motivated me to achieve great things. Her rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity, painting years of abuse and sabotage as character-building exercises that had prepared me for business success. The speed with which she transformed from dismissive cruelty to proud family supporter was both impressive and disgusting. Madison's desperate attempts to participate in the conversation via video call from jail added a surreal element to the proceedings, as she tried to rewrite our entire relationship history while wearing an orange jumpsuit and speaking through a monitored prison communication system. Her claims that she'd always believed in my potential and had only teased me as a form of sisterly bonding were contradicted by years of documented social media posts and recorded conversations. Her attempts to position herself as a victim of misunderstanding rather than a willing participant in family cruelty were pathetic and unconvincing. Tyler's social media documentation of his own cruelty became crucial evidence as we presented timeline analyses showing the systematic nature of family harassment and deliberate attempts to undermine my success. His posts, videos, and messages created an undeniable record of coordinated emotional abuse that had been designed to destroy my self-esteem and isolate me from potential support systems. The contrast between his documented cruelty and current attempts to claim ignorance about the impact of his behavior was stark enough to penetrate even his teenage capacity for self-deception. The exposure of Beverly's criminal background represented the most shocking revelation for Dad, who had never suspected that his wife's romantic history included marriage fraud, identity theft, and potentially murder. The presentation of police reports, court records, and insurance investigation files from Beverly's previous relationships painted a picture of sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than simple romantic opportunism. Dad's realization that he'd been targeted as a victim rather than chosen as a partner was devastating to his sense of identity and judgment. The evidence of insurance fraud regarding my mother's death was presented with clinical precision that couldn't hide the emotional devastation of learning that my mother had been murdered for money by the woman who'd replaced her. Medical examiner reports, toxicology analyses, and witness testimony revealed a carefully planned death that had been disguised as natural causes through forged documents and corrupted officials. Beverly's involvement in my mother's murder reframed every subsequent abuse as connected to that original crime, making years of mistreatment part of a larger pattern of criminal exploitation. Police arrival to arrest Beverly on multiple felony charges provided a satisfying conclusion to years of manipulation and abuse, though Beverly's attempts to maintain innocence and blame everyone else continued even as handcuffs were applied. Her demands to speak with her attorney and claims that she was being framed by jealous family members demonstrated the narcissistic personality that had driven her criminal behavior for decades. The charges read aloud during her arrest included fraud, elder abuse, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and murder, representing potential life imprisonment if convicted on all counts. Dad's complete emotional collapse as he realized the extent of his betrayal and abandonment of his daughter was perhaps the most difficult part of this process to witness, despite everything he'd put me through. His sobbing apologies and desperate attempts to explain how Beverly had manipulated his perceptions couldn't undo years of damage, but they represented genuine remorse rather than calculated manipulation. The recognition that he'd chosen his murderous wife over his innocent daughter was destroying him psychologically, creating sympathy that complicated my feelings about his role in this tragedy. Tyler's bullying victims coming forward with additional lawsuits and criminal complaints demonstrated the far-reaching impact of Beverly's influence on her children's moral development. The systematic cruelty he'd inflicted on vulnerable classmates reflected lessons learned from Beverly about deriving power through others' suffering. School counselors and psychologists testified about the lasting trauma experienced by Tyler's victims, some of whom required hospitalization and ongoing therapy to recover from psychological damage. These revelations transformed Tyler from a spoiled teenager into someone whose behavior had caused genuine harm requiring serious consequences. The family's financial ruin becoming public knowledge through media coverage of Beverly's arrest and trial proceedings meant that their social standing and reputation were destroyed along with their economic security. Beverly's gambling debts, Madison's fraud charges, and Tyler's legal liability created a perfect storm of financial obligations that exceeded their assets even before considering legal defense costs. The contrast between their previous lifestyle and current circumstances was stark enough to attract media attention, making their downfall a matter of public record rather than private shame. Beverly's desperate attempts to blame everyone else for her criminal behavior continued throughout the legal proceedings, as she claimed to be a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of a decades-long criminal enterprise. Her lawyers' attempts to present her as a woman driven to desperate measures by family pressures were undermined by evidence of her systematic targeting of wealthy widowed men and sophisticated criminal planning. The pattern of behavior across multiple relationships made claims of circumstantial crime impossible to sustain. Beverly's trial became a media sensation as prosecutors presented evidence spanning 3 decades of systematic fraud, manipulation, and murder that revealed her as one of the most successful female serial killers in modern American history. The prosecution's case included forensic evidence from multiple crime scenes, financial records showing patterns of inheritance theft, and testimony from survivors of her previous relationships who described identical manipulation techniques. Beverly's attempts to maintain innocence became increasingly desperate as evidence mounted, with her defense team eventually switching strategies to argue for reduced sentences based on psychological illness rather than claiming innocence. Madison's federal credit card fraud prosecution proceeded simultaneously, with evidence showing she'd been trained in criminal techniques by Beverly from an early age as part of a family crime enterprise. The sophistication of Madison's fraud schemes, combined with her recruitment and training of other participants, resulted in charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences despite her age and first offense status. Her attempts to claim ignorance about the criminal nature of her activities were undermined by recorded conversations with co-conspirators that demonstrated clear understanding of legal consequences and deliberate choice to proceed anyway. Tyler's cyberbullying cases resulted in both criminal prosecution and civil liability that would follow him into adulthood, with victim impact statements describing attempted suicides, ongoing therapy needs, and lasting psychological damage requiring years of treatment. The systematic nature of his harassment campaigns, combined with evidence of psychological manipulation techniques learned from Beverly, convinced judges that standard juvenile justice measures were insufficient to address the severity of his crimes. School district liability for failing to intervene despite multiple complaints added additional financial consequences for enabling Tyler's behavior. Dad's loss of business, house, and savings to legal fees and settlement payments was both financially devastating and emotionally appropriate given his role in enabling Beverly's crimes through willful blindness and abandonment of his paternal responsibilities. His accounting firm's reputation was destroyed by association with Beverly's criminal activities, leading to client departures and regulatory investigations that forced business closure. The family home was seized to pay legal judgments, leaving Dad homeless and dependent on charity from relatives who'd warned him about Beverly years earlier. The family's social exile from their community was swift and absolute, as neighbors, friends, and business associates distanced themselves from association with such spectacular criminal behavior and family dysfunction. Country club memberships were revoked, social invitations stopped arriving, and former friends crossed streets to avoid awkward encounters with family members. The children's schools requested transfers to avoid disruption, while Dad's professional associations suspended his memberships pending investigation of his knowledge about Beverly's activities. My decision about whether to help Dad represented the most difficult moral choice of this entire process, balancing justice with compassion while considering the impact of my choices on my own healing and future well-being. Dr. Rodriguez's counsel about the difference between forgiveness and accountability helped me understand that showing mercy didn't require accepting continued abuse or enabling destructive behavior. The distinction between helping someone who genuinely changed versus rescuing someone from appropriate consequences was crucial to making decisions that would promote actual justice rather than temporary relief. Rachel's final investigation report documented Beverly's involvement in at least 7 suspicious deaths over 30 years, making her one of the most prolific criminal enterprises in recent history while highlighting the failures of law enforcement coordination that had allowed her to continue operating across state boundaries. The sophisticated nature of Beverly's methods, including corruption of officials and manipulation of evidence, suggested criminal organization involvement that warranted federal investigation rather than simple state-level prosecution. The reopening of my mother's death investigation based on new evidence provided some measure of closure while raising disturbing questions about how many other victims Beverly might have claimed. Forensic reanalysis of preserved evidence using modern techniques confirmed the presence of rare toxins that hadn't been detectable during original investigations. Witness interviews revealed Beverly's presence at crucial moments and access to means that made murder feasible, while financial records showed her immediate benefit from my mother's death through marriage and inheritance manipulation. Beverly's sentencing to life imprisonment without possibility of parole represented justice for multiple victims while ensuring she could never harm anyone else. Her complete lack of remorse during sentencing, combined with attempts to negotiate reduced punishment in exchange for revealing other victims' locations, demonstrated the psychopathic personality that had driven decades of criminal behavior. The judge's comments about Beverly representing a unique threat to public safety reflected the unprecedented nature of her crimes and their impact on multiple families and communities. Madison's plea bargain, resulting in 8 years federal imprisonment with restitution requirements, provided consequences proportional to her crimes while offering opportunity for rehabilitation if she chose to accept responsibility for her choices. The terms of her probation following release would include financial monitoring and restrictions on access to credit and identity documents that would prevent future fraud activity. Her requirement to provide victim impact testimony during Beverly's trial forced confrontation with the harm caused by her criminal behavior. Tyler's mandated therapy and community service represented an attempt to address the psychological damage caused by Beverly's influence while providing consequences that matched his age and developmental stage. The requirement for intensive counseling focused on empathy development and moral reasoning was designed to counteract lessons learned from Beverly about deriving power through cruelty. His restriction from social media and internet access removed tools he'd used for harassment while forcing him to develop healthy relationship skills through supervised interactions. My decision about Dad's fate ultimately focused on creating boundaries that protected my well-being while allowing possibility for genuine relationship repair if he demonstrated sustained change in his attitudes and behavior patterns. The symbolic moment of returning the one-way bus ticket came during a carefully supervised meeting where I explained that his choice to send me away had actually freed me to build the life I'd always wanted, independent of their approval or support. This gesture represented closure rather than reconciliation, acknowledging the past while establishing terms for any future relationship. 6 months after Beverly's conviction and sentencing, my healing process had progressed through intensive therapy focused on processing decades of emotional abuse, family betrayal, and the devastating revelation that my mother had been murdered by someone I'd been forced to accept as family. Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in complex trauma and family abuse, helped me understand that my survival and success represented extraordinary resilience rather than simple good fortune. The therapy sessions provided tools for managing grief, anger, and the complicated emotions surrounding Dad's genuine remorse and attempts to rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations. Dr. Rodriguez had evolved from mentor and business partner into one of the most important people in my chosen family, offering wisdom, stability, and unconditional support that demonstrated what healthy family relationships could look like. Our professional collaboration continued to thrive as SM Tech Solutions expanded into new markets and developed additional breakthrough technologies, but the personal friendship had become equally valuable. His guidance during the darkest moments of Beverly's trial and the ongoing family legal proceedings showed me that trustworthy people existed and that my judgment about character had been accurate despite years of gaslighting. Rachel Thompson's decision to join my company as head of security represented both a professional triumph and personal validation, as her investigative skills were perfectly suited to protecting against corporate espionage and personal threats that accompanied extreme wealth and public recognition. Her friendship had developed naturally through our shared commitment to justice and protection of vulnerable people. Rachel's background in exposing fraud and corruption aligned with my growing interest in using business success to support broader social justice initiatives. Dad's supervised meetings with me occurred monthly under carefully controlled circumstances that prioritized my emotional safety while allowing him opportunity to demonstrate genuine change in his attitudes and behavior patterns. His progress was slow but seemed authentic, involving extensive therapy to understand how Beverly's manipulation had exploited his grief and insecurities while helping him develop better judgment about relationships and family dynamics. These meetings were difficult for both of us, requiring him to confront his failures as a father while allowing me to process anger and disappointment in a safe environment. The establishment of the Sophia Mitchell Foundation represented my commitment to supporting children from broken families who faced educational and emotional challenges similar to what I'd experienced. The foundation's programs included scholarships for students from abusive homes, therapy services for children dealing with family trauma, and legal advocacy for minors trapped in manipulative family situations. This work provided meaning beyond personal success while honoring my mother's memory through practical assistance for vulnerable children. Tyler's eventual genuine apology came after 18 months of mandated therapy and community service that had forced him to confront the impact of his bullying behavior on victims and their families. His letter was carefully crafted but seemed authentic, acknowledging specific harm he'd caused rather than offering generic expressions of regret. The supervised meeting where he delivered this apology in person was emotionally difficult but represented hope that Beverly's influence could be overcome through appropriate intervention and consequences. Madison's struggle with reality during her imprisonment involved gradual recognition of how Beverly's manipulation had shaped her values and expectations throughout her life. Letters from prison showed slow progress toward accepting responsibility for her criminal behavior rather than viewing herself as a victim of circumstances. Her participation in educational and therapy programs suggested potential for genuine rehabilitation, though the damage to family relationships might never be completely repaired. Beverly's continued letters from prison demonstrated her unchanging narcissistic personality and complete lack of genuine remorse for the lives she'd destroyed. These communications were monitored by law enforcement and used as evidence in ongoing investigations of her other potential victims. Her attempts to manipulate prison staff and other inmates showed that incarceration hadn't modified her fundamental approach to relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than genuine human connection. My choice to forgive but not forget represented a deliberate decision to release the anger and resentment that had consumed emotional energy I preferred to direct toward positive goals and relationships. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing their behavior or accepting renewed relationship without appropriate boundaries and demonstrated change. The distinction between personal peace and relationship restoration was crucial to maintaining psychological health while remaining open to genuine reconciliation if family members earned that opportunity through sustained behavioral change. The redefinition of family to include chosen relationships based on love, respect, and mutual support had created a network of people who celebrated my successes, supported me during challenges, and provided the emotional security that biological family had failed to offer. Emma from college remained a close friend despite geographical distance, while Dr. Rodriguez and Rachel formed the core of my new family structure. This chosen family demonstrated that love and loyalty were choices rather than biological obligations. My business expansion focused increasingly on ethical technology development that prioritized social benefit over pure profit maximization, reflecting values that had been shaped by experiencing both poverty and wealth, powerlessness and success. The company's commitment to transparent business practices and employee ownership models created workplace culture that supported human dignity rather than exploiting vulnerability. This approach proved that ethical behavior could coexist with financial success when priorities were properly ordered. The final scene of speaking at Stanford's graduation ceremony about resilience and family provided opportunity to share lessons learned through surviving betrayal and achieving success despite systematic sabotage. My message to graduating students emphasized that family should be defined by love and respect rather than biological connection, and that sometimes the greatest gift toxic family members can give is their absence from your life. The standing ovation from students, faculty, and families suggested that many people had experienced similar challenges with family relationships. The wisdom gained through this journey centered on understanding that sometimes the family that hurts you most teaches you your greatest strength by forcing you to develop independence, resilience, and accurate judgment about character and relationships. Beverly's cruelty had inadvertently prepared me for business success by teaching me to trust my instincts, protect my resources, and maintain emotional boundaries with people who didn't have my best interests at heart. These skills proved invaluable in both personal relationships and professional negotiations. The closing reflection about that one-way bus ticket representing freedom rather than abandonment had become a source of genuine gratitude despite the pain it initially caused. Dad's cruel gesture had actually liberated me from family obligations and expectations that would have limited my potential and prevented me from building the life I truly wanted. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that could have happened, though the recognition of that irony requires perspective that only comes with time and healing. Looking back on this incredible journey from family scapegoat to billionaire entrepreneur, I realized that every challenge had contributed to my eventual success in ways that conventional family support never could have achieved. The independence forced on me had developed problem-solving skills, the financial pressure had motivated innovation, and the emotional abuse had strengthened my character in ways that privilege and protection might have prevented. That bus ticket had indeed been a gift, though certainly not in the way Dad intended when he handed it to me with such cruelty and satisfaction. What would you do if you discovered your family had systematically sabotaged your life while you were secretly building a billion-dollar empire? Have you ever experienced family betrayal that seemed devastating at the time but later proved to be a blessing in disguise? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how you've handled difficult family relationships and whether you believe forgiveness is always possible or if some behaviors are truly unforgivable. If this story of resilience and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support for anyone who survived family abuse and found strength to build their own success. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming impossible odds and finding your true family among people who actually love and support you. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their current family situation doesn't determine their future possibilities, and remember that sometimes the greatest revenge is living well and proving wrong everyone who bet against you. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through betrayal, discovery, and ultimate triumph. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how your family treats you, and that the people who truly belong in your life will celebrate your success rather than trying to destroy it. May you find the courage to protect yourself from toxic relationships and the wisdom to recognize genuine love when it appears in your life, whether from family or the chosen family you create along the way.